Okay.
Okay, so please welcome Mr. Toine Manders.
Good afternoon. My topic today will be my life as a tax avoidance advocate. I will start in 1989 when I was drafted into the Dutch Army. As you can see from the picture, the rules in the Dutch Army are a little bit different from most countries. This was late 1989, October 89, just before the Berlin Wall came down. So I was actually sent to Germany. The reason the Dutch Army was in Germany is so that if the Soviet Union were to invade Western Europe, we'd be the first ones to stop them, to catch the bullets, you might say. So I was actually in Germany when this happened. I was in Germany while it was being reunified, when East West Germany were being reunified, so it was an interesting period. And I also visited, for the first time, former communist countries. That was quite an experience. I was already very fervently anti-communist, but seeing it with my own eyes strengthened my anti-communist convictions. I was born a libertarian, so I was anti-communist as a matter of course, but you know what they say, a picture speaks 1,000 words, and visiting a place in real life speaks 1,000,000 words. After I left the army, I started studying law at the University of Amsterdam in the old town center of Amsterdam. These are all buildings from the 17th century when Amsterdam was a very capitalist free market place, when most of the world and most of Europe were monarchies, where all the money flowed to the monarchs and they built huge palaces for themselves. In Amsterdam there was a merchant class of thousands of merchants, tens of thousands of merchants who built themselves really nice homes on the canals in Amsterdam, which are very close to the law faculty. As a matter of fact, when I first started studying there was so much lack of student housing that I was forced to stay at a youth hostel. And as a result, this is where I had to walk. When I went to my classes in the morning, I had to walk past the red light district to get from that youth hostel to my classes, to my courses. Soon after I started studying law, I encountered the Dutch Libertarian movement. I was already a very radical pro-freedom guy. Before I encountered the Libertarian movement, my position at the time was that the only legitimate function of government was police, courts, and army. So I was already sort of a minarchist when I encountered the Libertarian movement. I became an anarcho-capitalist. That's when I discovered there would be a world conference in Tallinn in Estonia in the summer of '93. So I drove there. I drove through Germany and Poland and Lithuania and Latvia to Estonia. And again, encountering all the aftershock of communism. And this is where I met a lot of people that are here today, including Ken Schooland. And I've attended like 15 conferences, ISIL World Conferences, or Liberties International as it's called these days, ever since. So that had a big influence on me. Before I knew there was a libertarian movement in the Netherlands, I co-founded a libertarian party in the Netherlands, but didn't really get off the ground, didn't really participate in elections. But after I noticed there was a real libertarian movement and became part of it, a real libertarian party was formed, meaning it was registered and it actually participated in national elections. And that was in May of 1994, and I was elected the prime candidate of the Libertarian Party of the Netherlands. I was 24 at the time, so it's the equivalent of running for president, you might say, in the United States. There was no internet at the time to speak of, so this was in the days when you had to actually stuff envelopes and send envelopes to the press to get some press attention. It wasn't easy because there were only 5 active people in the whole Libertarian Party. There was one Dutch Libertarian magazine that had 125 paid subscribers, so that gives you some idea of how big the Libertarian movement at the time was, and as a result, we did not get any seats in Parliament. We got just 2,400 votes, but it was a fun experience. While I was campaigning, I read this book, How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World by Harry Browne. One of the best books I've ever read, maybe the best book I've read. I can highly recommend it if you haven't read it already. Very inspirational. One of his main themes in the book is, well, I'll just read it because I don't want to mess up the quote. What he writes in this book is, as you view any situation in which you have a goal, there are basically 2 types of alternatives available to you. I call them direct and indirect. A direct alternative is one that requires only direct action by yourself to get a desired result. An indirect alternative requires that you act to make someone else do what is necessary to achieve your objective. Once you've seen the positions and attitudes of the other people involved, a direct alternative requires only that you make a decision. An indirect alternative requires that you change the attitude of one or more other persons, that they will do what you want. For example, suppose you feel your taxes are too high. An indirect alternative would be to start a campaign to lower the tax rates. A direct alternative would be to look for ways to avoid having to pay them. And this is only one example, but when he wrote this book, he was very much against the idea of being politically active. He saw it as a waste of time because there's so many people you have to convince. That's just about impossible. You could spend your whole life trying to convince others to give you more freedom, and it might not happen. It's very likely that it won't happen. So it's much better to just find direct alternatives, like find loopholes, find ways around the laws you don't want to follow, move to another country where what you want to do is allowed, or become a perpetual traveler, because the government usually leaves tourists alone. Tourists are not taxed. Their children are forced into schools. They're not being drafted into any armies. If you are a perpetual traveler, if you're a nomad, then you can escape most of the injustices the government wants to perpetrate upon you. A very inspirational book, but the funny thing is I was reading it as I was campaigning for the Libertarian Party. So the messages were a bit in conflict, you might say. But Harry Browne did make an interesting point in his book, and he said, if it's a hobby, if it's something you enjoy, if it's a challenge, like other people go dancing or collect stamps, then that's fine, go ahead. It's good to have a hobby if that gives you enjoyment. So that's how I could reconcile that I was spending all of my time campaigning with the Libertarian Party, because I really enjoyed it. I was being called a Jehovah Libertarian. This is a prayer that I first came across in a book of Ayn Rand, who, as you probably know, is very much an atheist. But she liked this particular prayer, and I like it too. And it's consistent with Harry Browne's view, if you leave the God part out of it. So the prayer says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Another very important chapter in Harry Browne's book that was very inspirational to me was about dealing with government. And he had formulated 3 principles on how to deal with government. The first principle is don't be awed by it. What little the government accomplishes is almost always due to the voluntary participation of its citizens. Those who don't want to help the government can go their own ways without running into much trouble. The second principle is don't confront the government. A sure way to make your life miserable is to attack the government head on. Its resources are limited, and it can't waste them tracking down every possible violator of every law. But it will certainly aim its power at anyone who publicly defies it. So keep to yourself, do what you have to do. That's a principle I have violated a few times in the years to come. I'll tell you more about that later. The third rule in dealing with government is Don't organize, don't get a large group of people together to defy tax laws, promote ways of circumventing the government, or openly violate regulations. By joining protests, you might wind up in jail and you won't have much freedom there. And mass campaigns are easy targets. That's where the government is likely to devote its limited resources. When many people are doing the same thing, it's easy to stop them by passing laws or applying existing laws against them. When you act alone, however, you're usually not worth the trouble. And then came, a lot of this book is about morality and developing your personal morality. So one of the topics he deals with is legally or illegally. Sooner or later, you'll have to make a decision regarding your willingness to obey laws. There's a normal reluctance to break laws. You can easily feel that you're contributing to the decay of your country or that you're making yourself vulnerable. However, there are thousands of once rich Cubans who wish today that they'd been willing to commit the crime of sending their funds out of Cuba before the government confiscated them. They fail to realize that no government obeys laws. It will change, overrule, ignore, or defy them whenever they get in its way. To count on the law to protect you is a grave mistake. Recognize also that you undoubtedly break laws continually. It's almost impossible to drive a car without breaking traffic laws, and most other kinds of laws are filled with contradictions, so that, that make nearly everyone a lawbreaker just by going about his own business. As a matter of fact, a criminal defense attorney wrote a book called 3 Felonies a Day, which is about over-criminalization. And his point is that the American federal government has introduced so many federal laws and regulations that the average American commits 3 felonies a day without realizing it. To give you one small example, there's a guy who was importing lobster tails from Honduras, and he should have packed it in plastic, but he packed it in cardboard boxes instead. Or it was the other way around, I forgot which was which. Anyway, he got 8 years of jail time for using the wrong material. He should have used plastic. If you don't believe me, look it up, Google it, you'll find it. Well, furthermore, to determine whether or not to break a law, the only consideration should be the consequences to yourself. What is the risk involved? What would happen if you're caught? How much are you gaining by breaking the law? As you evaluate those consequences, don't overlook your own emotional nature. Don't do something that will make it impossible for you to sleep at nights. The money saved may not be worth the anxiety. But don't be swayed by considerations of patriotism, law and order, or national solidarity. Those things are only slogans designed to further the government's interests at the expense of yours. In my own case, I've had to handle things legally. By writing books like this, like this one, I forgo the anonymity that would allow me more flexibility. I've chosen to write the books and obey the laws because the books increase my income enough to make the choice profitable. As it is, however, I've always managed to pay little or no income tax just by using the government's own laws to my advantage. There are more than enough loopholes to reduce my tax bill to a minimum. Now, this again was very inspirational to me. I was young when I read the book. I was still in college. I didn't have any firm career plans. But after reading this book, I decided that I was going to make a career out of finding loopholes and helping people use them. And at the same time, I realized that what he wrote here would apply to me too. I enjoy openly criticizing the government. I enjoy making very radical libertarian statements. This is not something you can combine with breaking the law. So as what he wrote here, I decided that I would pay the same price Harry Browne is paying. I would have to follow the law myself in order to be able to combine, on the one hand, making all these radical anti-government statements, at the same time helping people use loopholes. So when I was offered a job by a firm called Haagse Juristencollege, literally translated it means lawyers' firm of The Hague. When I was offered a job to advise military draftees on how to avoid the military drafts, I immediately took the job because that was exactly the sort of job that I was looking for. Well, that firm has advised over 6,000 clients on how to avoid the military draft successfully. There's never been a single client we had to say, sorry, boy, but you're going to have to wear a uniform and crawl through the mud because we can't help you anymore. So that was a big success, but then in 1996, the draft was suspended because the Cold War was over. And a lot of people said very strange things to me. They said, well, I'm very sorry for you that you've lost your livelihood. You must feel terrible. I said, what are you talking about? I threw a party, I'm celebrating. This is a wonderful thing that the draft's been suspended. And there's plenty of other injustices to help people avoid. So I'm not worried about being stuck without any income. So when it was suspended, the firm came up with a new target group, a new audience, which was going to be the business owner, the entrepreneur. Because the business owner is a persecuted minority. More than anybody else in society, business owners are being used as involuntary and unpaid tax collectors. Almost all taxes collected by the government, they don't collect it from the actual taxpayers themselves. They make businesses collect these taxes for them. That's true for the income tax. It's true for all these mandatory premiums. It's true for import tariffs, VAT, excise taxes, you name it. Just about every tax that's ever been devised is not collected from the taxpayers directly, but through businesses, so that people don't realize how high their tax burden really is, because the taxes are hidden in the form of higher prices and lower wages. And I have often made the prediction that if I could change one little thing about the tax system, and I would change it so that taxes would have to be collected from the taxpayers directly rather than through businesses, that there would be a tax riot, a tax revolution. People would become extremely angry if they realized just how high their taxes really were. And not only are business owners forced to collect the government's taxes for them and hand them over, also most regulations are aimed at businesses. Most people who are not in business have no clue as to the regulatory burden, because it's usually the businessmen that are being persecuted, that are being forced to obey them, that are fined and jailed if they don't obey them. So we decided to choose the business owner as our new audience, as our niche in the market. So we decided to look for loopholes that businessmen, that entrepreneurs could use. And at the time, in Europe and also in the Netherlands, company law was not very business friendly. To incorporate your business, you had to jump through all these hoops. You had to meet a minimum capital requirement of 18,000 euros. This was before the euro, but it would equate to 18,000 euros. And you had to get permission from the Justice Department, from the Minister of Justice, which could take 6 to 12 months just to get the permission. And if you'd ever gone bankrupt or had been director or advisor of a bankrupt company, you wouldn't get the permission. So that was pretty bad. So, there were certain tax advantages to incorporating your business, but if you didn't get the permission, or if you had to wait a year to get it, or if you didn't have the 18,000 euros, you couldn't have those tax advantages. So that was a problem, and then we found a solution. And the solution was the European Treaty guarantees freedom of establishment, which means that any person, any citizen of any EU member state can form a corporation in any other member state of the European Union. And that corporation also has freedom of establishment, so it can run a business in any member state, including the member state where the entrepreneur lives and works. So you can make a U-turn, you might say. So a Dutch business owner could simply incorporate his business in the most business-friendly EU member state, which was the UK. And then this UK company could run a business in the Netherlands, and that way you could circumvent all these onerous regulations imposed by the Dutch government. It's a similar thing you can do in the US. You can run a business in New York, but you can incorporate in Delaware. That's something that the EU has made possible as well. I'm strongly critical of the EU, but this happens to be a good thing. So I decided to help clients take advantage of this opportunity. And that was a big success. So we formed over 6,000 UK companies for Dutch clients. And that way, these clients could better protect their personal wealth because they would no longer be personally liable for the company's claims, including tax claims and tax debts. Now, the government didn't like it, of course, so they passed a law in '98 to make it more difficult. The law basically said that if you form a corporation in another member state, another country, and it runs a business in the Netherlands, and there's no real connection with the country where you incorporated, then it's like a sham, and therefore we will disallow any limited liability protection, which makes so that would defeat the purpose. That law was passed, and so we decided to fight it in court, in the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. That dragged on for many years. In the meantime, in 2000, I became the managing partner of this firm. While we were waiting for the court to make a decision, this product that had been very successful was hard to sell because there was a lot of uncertainty. You didn't know if you were protected by limited liability or not. But we didn't decide to just wait and see. Instead, we started developing a new product, which was tax avoidance. So we opened an office in Cyprus in 2001 so that our clients could benefit from the tax advantages that Cyprus had to offer, which were huge because the products that we developed made it possible for our clients to cut their tax bill roughly in half and to avoid capital gains tax on the value of the business, on the rising value of the business altogether. And it also made it possible to avoid inheritance tax on any assets based on company profits. So that was quite a success. Then, this was my motto at the time, obviously. Don't feed the state. It's you have to starve the beast. If you feed the state, they use the money to throw bombs of innocent people. They hire bureaucrats to write rules and regulations and enforce them, undermine our liberties. So you have to minimize your contribution to the government as much as possible. I've given over the years, I've given many hundreds, if not thousands, of interviews to newspapers, magazines, radio stations, TV stations, usually national ones because the Netherlands is a small country with 70 million people, so most radio and TV stations are national. And the same goes for newspapers and magazines. And the things I've said, well, this was in the Walk for Capitalism, by the way, in 2001. I'll translate it for you. It says, taxation is theft, tax evasion is self-defense. Thank you. Could someone give me a glass of water, please? Yeah, so I've often said things like tax avoidance is a moral duty. Because if you can't avoid tax, thank you. If you have the opportunity to avoid tax, and you don't, well, what that means is you're voluntarily handing over money to the government that you don't owe. Because the definition of tax avoidance is that it's legal. If you find a legal way to pay less tax, that's called tax avoidance. If you can do it and decide not to, in my view, that makes you immoral because the government uses that money to throw bombs at innocent people, to hire bureaucrats who undermine our liberties by a bunch of new rules every day almost. So you're contributing to the damage government does if you hand over money voluntarily. So that's why, in my view, you have a moral duty to avoid tax as much as possible. And another thesis I've often defended is the government is a criminal organization because they use our tax money to do all these horrible things like kill people and jail people who've done nothing wrong and so forth. The test case. I said it would drag on for many years. It lasted from 98 to 2003, but finally in 2003, the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg handed down the so-called Inspire Art decision named after an artist who was willing to, a friend of mine was willing to act as guinea pig for this test case. And they decided that we were right, that the law indeed was inconsistent with EU law, that it was a violation of the freedom of establishment. And as a result, not just the Netherlands had to change the law and eventually got rid of all these business unfriendly regulations like the duty to first ask the justice minister for permission and to pay and to put in a 18,000 minimum capital requirement. The Netherlands got rid of it, but not just the Netherlands got rid of it. All the EU member states had to get rid of it. Germany and France had similar regulations. They all had to get rid of it too. So that had quite an impact. It gave us a lot of good publicity, a lot of free publicity. So business went well, so we moved up to a better, nicer office. So this was the office we moved into in 2004. It was at an estate on the border of the city of The Hague. Here's a few more pictures. This is what it looks like in wintertime. 2006, we opened an office in Dubai. Cyprus is a low-tax country that has a lot of tax treaties that can often be used very favorably in tax structures, but it's not a zero-tax haven. Dubai, on the other hand, is a zero-tax haven. It's one of the Emirates, one of the United Arab Emirates. And the Emirates have no personal income tax, no payroll tax, no social security tax, no corporate income tax, no capital gains tax, no wealth tax, no inheritance tax, no gift tax, and no withholding taxes. It's easier to tell you what taxes they do have. They have a value-added tax. They didn't at the time, but introduced in 2018, a 5% VAT. They have a property tax that can go up, it's a municipal tax, go up to 5 or 10%. And they have import duties, but generally they're just 5% unless they're sinful products like tobacco, alcohol, that sort of thing, sugar. That's it. And you can avoid most of these import duties by going to a free zone. So it's an excellent place to do business. It has not just very low taxes, almost no taxes, but it also has a very low regulatory burden. You can hire people from anywhere in the world. If you want to hire staff from India, from Pakistan, from the Philippines, from Bangladesh, from China, from Africa, you can hire anybody you want, and they will give this person a work visa and a permanent permit to become a resident. So as a result, 85% of the population in the Emirates wasn't born there. A very interesting place. Also, economically, it's very interesting. They have broken very many records. Most people only know of the records that they have the tallest building and the tallest hotel and those sorts of records. But here I have some economic statistics. Since independence in 71, the UAE's economy has grown by nearly 231 times. So this is not 231%, it's 231 times to 1.45 trillion dirham in 2013. The non-oil trade has grown to 1.2 trillion. So that's almost all of it. A lot of people think that the Emirates are so rich because of the oil. But what you can see here is that most of their income is not oil income. As a matter of fact, it's only one emirate that has the oil, which is Abu Dhabi. Dubai has almost no oil to begin with. What little oil they had is almost finished. The non-oil trade grew by 28 times between 81 and 2012. Dubai's economy from 75 through 2008 grew by a factor of 11, making it the fastest growing economy in the world over the period, according to a study by the Dubai Economic Council. The study breaks down the growth between 75 through 90, showing an annual rise in GDP of about 6%, and then 1990 through 2005, showing an annual rise of about 9%. If one focuses on the years 2000 to 2008, one sees an extraordinary growth rate on average of over 10% per year. The research underlines that few other countries can match the Emirates' growth, citing the GDPs of other city-states, such as Hong Kong and Singapore, in comparison, and the US as a benchmark. The US GDP tripled from 75 through 2008. Hong Kong grew by a factor of 7, Singapore by a factor of 10, Dubai by a factor of 11. In 2006, I was invited to debate on national TV the Dutch Minister of Integration and Asylum Affairs, and the topic was integration. And in this debate, I pointed to Dubai as an example of a country that has 85% of its population consisting of people not born there, consisting of foreigners, and that they have amazingly few problems. They have a very low crime rate. None of these people are on welfare because there is no welfare for non-citizens in the Emirates. They all have jobs and they all make a lot more money than they did at home, usually 2 to 3 to 4 times more than they made in the country they're from. Most Western welfare states are terrified of immigrants because they cause all these problems, they cost so much money and commit all these crimes. But This is an example of a country where 85% of the population is foreign-born, and these problems are very, very small. I was cut out of the interview. When they sent it up, when they broadcast it, I was cut out. Anyway, 2008, I started a campaign on national radio, broadcasting radio commercials with the slogan, "Taxation is theft." And that caused quite an uproar. And as a result, somebody made a complaint to the Advertising Code Commission. And the complaint was, by labeling the levying of taxes as theft, a wrong morality is promoted, whereby it is considered normal not to contribute to the society in which one benefits oneself. By the way, the literal text of the commercial read, "Taxation is theft. Tax avoidance is worthwhile for entrepreneurs and consultants with a profit above 20,000 euros per year. Would you like to know more?" And then the name of her firm. Now, according to the committee, the statement is in violation of the Dutch Advertising Code. They declared this complaint against the radio commercial to be well-founded because the advertisement is said to be contrary to decency. Taxes would not be theft because it is levied on the basis of the so-called social contract. Officially, this Advertising Code Foundation is the product of self-regulation. Only the 11 organizations in the industry association that work together in the foundation are required to adhere to the recommendations of the Advertising Code Committee. However, pursuant to the Media Act, all Dutch broadcasters who broadcast advertising are obliged to join the Advertising Code Foundation. Therefore, there is no other option for the news station, for the radio station, than to remove this state-unfriendly commercial. So it's called self-regulation, but it isn't, of course. It's state regulation. They call it a recommendation, but it's censorship. So it's Orwellian newspeak, like war is peace and slavery is freedom and so forth. This is censorship, said Toine Manders, director of HEC. Not only are we forced to hand over half of what we earn, that money is then used to silence us if you want to object to this legalized robbery. There was a radio debate I was invited to. The same radio station that where the commercials were being broadcast, and they invited as my opponent in the debate about the thesis "Taxation is Theft," a very famous professor in tax economy, fiscal economy, who was a senior advisor to the Dutch government on reforming the Dutch tax system. And during the debate, what turned out is that he thought that I wasn't being serious. Before the debate started, he thought that I didn't really mean it, that I was just being, I was just saying this to make it sound more interesting. It was only during the debate that he found out that I was actually dead serious. And when he discovered this, he became angry, and his face turned red, and he started he started using very strange arguments, like if I'd been a student, I wouldn't have passed any of his exams, thereby admitting he was corrupt, basically. And so he got extremely angry. It was I don't think there are any English subtitles yet, but it's been viewed many times. It's given me a lot of positive feedback. I got so many new clients from this campaign that I couldn't possibly see them all. I hired some staff to help me, but even then we couldn't handle it. So I started giving seminars, free of charge. Anybody that wanted to come in could come in. Seminars titled "Tax Avoidance and Wealth Protection for Entrepreneurs." And I gave hundreds of them over the years. And if people were still interested after the seminar, then they could make an appointment and get more personalized information. I also allowed TV cameras during these seminars because my theory was it's all legal. What we do is completely within the limit of the law. The structures that we promote have been challenged by the tax authorities many times. Every time the court finds in favor of the tax avoider and against the tax authorities. So why do this in secret? We can do this out in the open. One of the quotes I used in this seminar is a quote by Dennis Healy, who was the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, the finance minister in the second half of the 70s, a Labour politician. This was when the UK raised its top income tax rate to 83% for earned income and to 97% for investment income. And this is the quote: "The difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion is the thickness of a prison wall." And I use the quote to explain to the people in these seminars how important it is to be very aware of this distinction between tax avoidance and tax evasion. That it's very important to know exactly where the limit is and not go over the limit. In 2009, there were two sisters of our Queen who both were caught, quote unquote, avoiding tax. And not for a minor amount. They were caught avoiding tax for hundreds of millions of euros, using offshore tax haven, even using the Channel Islands and so forth. And the leftist politicians were outraged, and the leftist press, well, sort of superfluous. The press was outraged over this. And they all said, well, this is horrible. These people should set the right example, and instead they're giving a very bad example, and something must be done. And well, that's what the leftist politicians said. They were all outraged. The rightist politicians said, well, they're following the law, so I mean, they said it's really bad to even imply that a member of the royal family would break the law. It's all within the law. So nobody argued that it was illegal what they were doing. So the disagreement was about whether it was moral or immoral. And the leftists said it's extremely immoral what these people are doing. So I was interviewed by a national TV station on this topic. I was asked what my opinion was of this. And I said, well, my opinion is that taxation is theft, therefore tax avoidance is the moral duty of every taxpayer. Because if you can avoid tax and choose not to, you're voluntarily funding the government that uses it to undermine our liberties and kill people. However, these sisters of the Queen, they are not net taxpayers, because how did they acquire these fortunes? They inherited it from their parents, from our kings and queens. How did they make these fortunes? They made it by being paid a lot of tax money, by extorting us. So they are in possession of ill-gotten gains. So as a result, these sisters of the Queen, the only moral thing that they can do is give the money back to the victims, not to the state, mind you, back to the actual victims, the taxpayers that it was stolen from. In April 2010, I was interviewed by a man called Jort Kelder, who's famous in the Netherlands. He was the chief editor of the biggest business magazine of the Netherlands, and then he started working for the government TV stations, which pay very well. The people who work there, the top people who work there, make a lot more than the prime minister. And he interviewed me, and I explained to him how my tax structures worked. But it had to be a very short interview. It had to be like a soundbite. And then he cut off a bit. So when it was finally broadcast, he had cut off of what I'd said to him, how I answered his questions. He cut off a piece. And because he cut off a piece, if you took it very literally and didn't allow for the fact that he had cut part off, it could actually be construed as to imply tax evasion, which of course wasn't true, but and most people wouldn't even know the difference anyway because it was too technical. But because he cut off this relevant part, that's how it could be construed. And after he'd interviewed me, he went to the Dutch Minister of Finance, a man named Jan Kees de Jager. He didn't tell me up front that's what he was going to do. I mean, I would have still given the interview if he had told me up front, but he hadn't told me. And by the way, this man was in the process of ruining my business because he had announced publicly in 2008 that he was going to pass new legislation that would completely eradicate all these tax advantages of the structures I was promoting. But he didn't explain how, he didn't explain what the law would look, how it would be done, because once it became clear what the new law would look like, then I would be able to find a loophole in the new law. This is how it's been done for decades. The laws change all the time. People like me have to just find new loopholes in the new laws. But because he was postponing making clear what the new law would look like, there was this sword hanging over our heads. And all these clients said, well, I'm sure that when the law is finally published, you'll find a new loophole. But until that time, we'll just hold off. We'll wait, forming a structure. We'll come back to you when you found the new loophole for the new law. So our turnover dropped dramatically because everybody was waiting for more clarity. So he was behind that. So in a way, he was a smart man, you could say, for his own purpose by making this huge public announcement and then let it hang over our heads for a long time. Anyway, the same guy was being interviewed by this journalist, Jort Kelder, and Kelder repeated to him what I'd said to him, but of course he again cut off the relevant part. I don't think this guy, this Minister of Finance, would know the difference anyway, but even if he did, he should be aware that a journalist can be trusted to repeat verbatim the exact structure. It's too complex for that. Anyway, his response was, if you do this, then men with guns of special branch of the tax authorities, the guys that do criminal investigation of tax crimes, they will come to your house in the middle of the night and wake you up and take you to jail. That's what's going to happen to you. Now, I didn't really take that seriously. I thought, well, what's he to say? He's not going to say in public TV, yes, Mr. Manders is right. It's very easy to avoid our taxes. So I didn't really think much of that at the time. I told you our business was suffering because of these this thing hanging over our heads. It was unclear how the law would be changed. And this was also on the day of the Great Recession. And as a result, one of our companies had some back taxes to pay. And what happened was there was a conflict, there was a disagreement between us and the tax authorities. So we sued the tax authorities about this, and the case went to court. But they didn't wait for the court to make their decision. Instead, they filed for bankruptcy. They filed for this company's bankruptcy. And the court agreed to that, so the company was declared bankrupt on July 1st, 2010. And by itself, it wasn't that big a deal because there were a lot of companies in our group, and the most important company was abroad. So by itself, it wasn't that big a deal. But the court-appointed trustee in bankruptcy, a baron, here's his picture, he seemed to be on a crusade. So the things he did were unheard of. So he raided my private house, so one morning he was in front of my door, and he had 2 cops with him, and he had 3 lawyers with him, and he had a locksmith with him. And he said if I didn't open the door, the locksmith would open the door. And he had a statement signed by a lower judge that he was allowed to do all this. So I let him in. And he said he was looking for cash, and he was looking for missing business records. And then he opened my safe, and he found like 1,200 euros, 20 francs, and $30. And a couple of days later, I was on the front page of a national newspaper saying that this receiver had found dollars, francs, and euros in my safe, but not how many those were. And they also claimed there was a huge chaos, a huge administrative chaos. And Well, I don't have time to go into all the details. If you want more details, I can tell you after my speech. He raided my house twice, actually, because there was another dormant company that he also filed for bankruptcy for, and then he did the whole thing again. There was a problem in the Netherlands at the time, and the problem was that a lot of people were setting up companies, letting them go bankrupt, because under Dutch law, the receivers must be paid by whatever money's left in the bankrupt company. But if there's no money left, then the court-appointed receivers can't make any money, so they do nothing. So they don't investigate whether there was bankruptcy fraud or not. So the estimate was that 97% of bankruptcy fraud cases were unsolved because receivers couldn't make any money finding out if it was even the case. So the receivers, they lobbied the government for a solution to this problem. And the solution they came up with was that the government should guarantee their salaries, which are roughly between 120 and 250 euros an hour. So the idea was the government must guarantee our salaries, and then once it's guaranteed, then we can go after these directors of these companies and sue them for their private assets. And then the taxpayer won't cost the taxpayer a dime, because we'll just go after these directors of these companies. But in order to get money, to get this guarantee, these receivers have to meet certain criteria. First criterion is the receiver must suspect bankruptcy fraud. Well, this guy suspected there was bankruptcy fraud in my case. The second criteria is he must be willing to investigate it. Well, he was happy to investigate it at a fee of 250 euros an hour. The third condition was that he had to be willing to sue me for my private assets to recover his, not just his salary, but also the debts of the bankrupt company. Well, he was happy to do that too at 250 euros an hour. And another condition was that I had to have some assets. I had a home, so that was enough to satisfy the bureaucrats. And also, if he found bankruptcy fraud, then he had to file a report with the prosecutor's office. And so what he did is he went to special branch, so the criminal investigators of the tax authorities, and said, I have a big fish for you here. Why don't you do all the investigation, and you write up this report for the prosecutors, and I'll sign my signature, and then I get paid 2,500 euros for signing the signature, and that's how it happened. He filed his report later that year, and he went to the press. So the press, he made it public that he had filed a report against me for bankruptcy fraud. So that was, of course, very bad for my line of business. Because what was my line of business? I was in the trust business, trust services, a trust company. What does that mean? How do you avoid tax? You avoid tax by turning over your assets, your business, to an entity like a trust or a foundation or corporations owned by a trust or foundation. And you are not allowed to be on the board of the foundation or the trust. You have to have independent foundation counselors or independent trustees provided by my firm. And you have to trust these people that they will manage your assets and won't run off with them. So before you do this, you Google the trust firm you're about to hire, and if you then come across these types of accusations, most people are no longer interested. So this was extremely bad for business, obviously.
Mr. Manders, sorry, we
Yeah.
run out of time, even the question time, so just a few minutes, please.
Okay, well then I'll have to be very quick. Okay, so this was one of the headlines, Tax Evader Bankrupt. 2012, there was a national election campaign for the Libertarian Party. I was again chosen as the prime candidate. I threw some money out of a helicopter as part of this campaign. I debated the Minister of Education, Culture and Science, who was also to be the future Minister for the Interior, the guy who gave the government the right to hack our phones and other devices, this guy. I hired a company with a laser to laser the word bankrupt on wall, the front wall of the Dutch central bank. By the way, the same central bank that after the euro was introduced and they no longer had the gilde to regulate, the new business was regulating banks and trust companies. And a little later, these guys from the Dutch central bank came to my office to interview us. I was interviewed by RT, 2013. In October, I moved to Cyprus to run the head office in Cyprus, and this is the office was on the ground floor, and I was living with my family on the first floor. This is a Christmas picture taken in Christmas 2013. Then January 28th, 2014, the criminal division raided our offices in the Netherlands and in Cyprus, arrested me and my colleague. And the headline read, "We were arrested for a multi-million-dollar fraud via Cyprus." The equivalent of the Financial Times in the Netherlands said, "Arrested again." This is a picture that was taken while we were doing this central bank thing that they used for this piece. This is the receiver. They're quoting the receiver that I disadvantage others for my own freedom. This is an article published on the Liberty International website. Arrested just weeks before election. I was held for 3.5 months in pretrial detention without any evidence, which is not needed under Dutch law. You don't need to present evidence to keep someone in pretrial detention. All you have to show is that someone is either a flight risk, or there's a risk that he will do it again, or that he will influence witnesses or tamper evidence. And that's enough to keep someone in pretrial detention. There was a Facebook group called Free Toine Manders. This is the quote they used. The Spanish LP was very supportive. So was the Russian Libertarian Party. They even went so far as to picket outside the Dutch embassy in Moscow with a banner that said "Free Toine Manders." Then the International Alliance of Libertarian Parties was founded in 2015, and a little later I joined its board. These were the founding members, and these are the purposes. Then the Panama Papers were published, and I worked with Mossack Fonseca, the Panamanian law firm, whose information had been stolen and published, which was the Panama Papers. And as a result, I was being asked for a TV debate with Paul Tang, a Labour member of the European Parliament, specialized in tax matters, tax avoidance. The thesis of tax avoidance is okay. I was then interviewed by Ancilla Tilia, an activist for privacy rights. In a previous career, she was a fetish model and an actress. I was invited to debate the editor-in-chief of Elsevier magazine on the moral duty to avoid tax. This is all national TV. This was the headline when the trial sort of started. Didn't really start, but there was a court session where I was allowed to put in some requests. Another headline of the same period. The Dutch Financial Times, you might say, says, "The tax authorities hunt for HEC clients." My lawyer had the theory that one major reason why they were doing all this is to get their client records. So on that day in court, which wasn't the real trial yet, he asked the court to force the public prosecutors to hand over internal documents to check his theory that the real reason they did all this is to collect all these clients' data, which they did and which they used. And when that happened, there were two prosecutors, and one of them turned red. Her face and her neck turned completely red when he asked the court permission for access to internal documents, which he didn't get, by the way. The court declined that request. Then I was subpoenaed to appear in front of Parliament, the Parliamentary Questioning Committee on Tax Schemes. I did not have the right not to appear, I did not have the right to remain silent, I did not have the right to refuse to answer questions nor to avoid incriminating myself, and I was interrogated under oath. And that was all while my criminal trial was in progress. There were already 25 witnesses that had been heard, another 20 were to follow. The parliamentarians were all leftists. They admitted to having talked to the prosecutors before they interrogated me. And I was interviewed by a major Dutch national newspaper. Here's the headline of that interview. Tax laws are moral rights and nothing to be ashamed of. This is what it looked like, this interrogation. This is a member of the Socialist Party who interrogated me. The Socialist Party used to be called the Marxist-Leninist Party, and they got their seat capital from flying to Mao's China in the early 70s, and they came back with a suitcase filled with US dollars. Their logo is the tomato, because they like to present themselves anti-establishment, throwing tomatoes at the establishment. So her obvious goal in interrogating me was to do what people did in the Middle Ages, to throw rotten tomatoes at someone who can't escape. It backfired though, because the video of this interrogation went viral, was watched millions of times, and it's given me a lot of new clients. So sometimes I consider sending her some flowers for all the new business she gave me. One of the things she said is, so you're against taxation, you think it's theft, but you live in a home that's subsidized by the government. Is that true? So I got angry at her and said, well, the government took everything I have, took my house. This reminds me of the GDR, where people were shot for trying to escape communism because they owed the government money, because they were educated by the state. What I should have said is what Harry Brown said, of course. The government is good at one thing. It knows how to break your legs, hand you a crutch, and say, see, if it weren't for the government, you wouldn't be able to walk. Telegraph, the biggest newspaper in the Netherlands, had the headline, "Taxation is a major injustice." The day after this interrogation, they had a national survey about this question, is taxation a major injustice? 90% of the survey participants agreed with me. I was interviewed. Then in October 2018, the criminal trial finally started after almost 5 years. And there's a lot of journalists in the courtroom, and one thing they thought was very interesting is that it became apparent that the tax authorities had set up an undercover cop who came in, presented as if he were a client, had a microphone in his pocket, and talked to my colleague for many hours, and nothing came of it. There was no evidence. Well, there was never any evidence of any crime in any of this case, but even this undercover cop did not get any evidence. This is basically the same headline. Then I was sentenced. So I was acquitted of the major charge. The major charge was that I was a member of a criminal organization whose intent was to help clients, whose intent was to evade tax and launder money. And I was acquitted of this, and the prosecutors did not appeal. They can appeal in the Netherlands. They can actually appeal twice if you're acquitted, but they didn't. I was also acquitted of the charge of providing trust service without a license. They did appeal that one. I was acquitted of filing incorrect VAT returns. They decided to appeal that acquittal as well. And I was sentenced to 180 hours of community service for a technicality breaking the trust law, the law regulating trust companies. Under that interpretation, my view is that the law is inconsistent with EU law, is inconsistent with the freedom of establishment, the freedom to offer services in other member states. So I've decided to appeal that and appeal it to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, and I'm confident I'll win that one as well.
Mr. I'm sorry to push again. We need to move on, please. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Thank you for your attention. Do you have any questions?
I apologize. Thank you very much.